A Navy SEAL and his old K9 found a starving German Shepherd trembling beneath a frozen bridge. She was barely alive, with a rope scar around her neck, but beside her lay a child's note begging, "Please don't leave them alone." One word changed everything. Them. When the SEAL followed the clue, he uncovered something far darker than abandonment, and the dog he thought he was saving would soon become the only hope for a terrified boy lost in the snow. Before we begin, tell us in the comments what city you're watching from tonight, and don't forget to subscribe for more heartwarming stories of courage, faith, and the animals who lead us back to hope. Late winter held Traverse City in a gray, frozen hush, with dirty snow along the Boardman River and wind moving through the bare trees like a tired whisper. Daniel Hayes walked alone except for the old German Shepherd at his side, though anyone who knew Chief would never have called Daniel alone. Daniel was 40 years old, a former Navy SEAL with a tall, broad-shouldered frame, weathered light skin, short, dark brown hair cut with military neatness, and a square jaw shadowed by a close-cropped beard. His pale blue eyes were steady in the way of a man who had learned to notice danger before it introduced itself. He wore a dark winter field jacket over a plain gray shirt, faded jeans, and heavy brown boots. But even out of uniform, he still carried himself like someone standing on invisible orders. Years overseas had carved patience into him, but loss had carved silence deeper. Since leaving the teams, he had learned that peaceful places could feel louder than war when a man had too much memory and not enough reason to speak. Chief moved beside him with the disciplined calm of an old soldier. He was a 7-year-old working-line German Shepherd, large and sable-coated, with black along his back, gray-brown fur along his chest and legs, and amber eyes that missed almost nothing. One ear had a small notch near the tip, and a faint scar crossed the bridge of his muzzle, nearly hidden beneath thick winter fur. Chief had once followed Daniel through dust, gunfire, and nights where every breath had to be earned. Now he walked through snow as if the whole frozen trail were still a patrol route, his paws silent, his body relaxed, his mind never fully asleep. Daniel had brought him out after a long day because the river usually helped. The dark water moved under thin ice. The trees stood like witnesses, and the old wooden bridge ahead looked forgotten by everyone except joggers, deer, and boys brave enough to cut through the park before sunset. Daniel was thinking of nothing and everything when Chief stopped, not slowed. Stopped. His body became still, his head angled toward the bridge, ears forward, tail level. Daniel took one more step before the leash tightened in his gloved hand. He looked down. "Chief?" The dog did not bark. That was what made Daniel's chest tighten. Chief barked for threats. He lunged only when necessary. But when he froze like this, silent and certain, it meant the world had shifted somewhere beyond human hearing. Daniel followed his gaze to the lower steps of the bridge, where snow had drifted against rotting wood and the space underneath lay black as a sealed mouth. He crouched slowly, one hand near Chief's collar, and peered beneath the platform. At first, he saw only shadow. Then the shadow trembled. A German Shepherd female lay curled in the frozen dirt, so thin her ribs showed beneath her gray, mud-matted coat. Ice clung to the fur around her legs. Her muzzle was narrow from hunger, her ears flattened against her skull, and her pale yellow eyes stared at Daniel with the exhausted terror of an animal that had learned every reaching hand might become punishment. Around her neck ran a dark, ugly groove where fur had been rubbed away, a wound-shaped memory of rope or nylon pulled too tight for too long. Daniel felt something cold move behind his ribs, not anger yet, but the old stillness that came before it. He lowered his voice. "Easy, girl. Nobody's going to hurt you." Chief lowered himself into the snow without command, turning his head slightly away so he would not challenge her. The wounded dog flinched, then stared at him as if she could not understand why such a strong dog would make himself small. Daniel removed one glove and held his bare hand low, letting her smell the space between them. She shook so hard the dirt beneath her paws trembled. When he slid his jacket liner forward like a blanket, she tried to pull deeper into the gap, but weakness betrayed her. Daniel eased his arms beneath her chest and hips. She made one small sound, not a growl, not a cry, just a broken breath. As he lifted her, she twisted her head back toward the darkness under the bridge, again and again, as though some piece of her heart had been left behind. That was when Daniel noticed the objects half buried in snow: an empty plastic food container, a napkin with 2 crumbs of kibble frozen inside, a small blue toy truck, missing one wheel, and a folded scrap of notebook paper. The handwriting was uneven, pressed hard by a child's pencil. "Please don't leave them alone." Daniel read it twice. Them. His grip tightened around the trembling dog. Chief stood beside him, staring into the dark space under the bridge, and Daniel understood that this rescue had already become something larger. A branch cracked beyond the cottonwoods. Daniel looked up and saw a boy standing behind a tree. He was about 12, thin and pale, with sandy brown hair sticking out beneath a red knit cap, a crooked blue coat zipped to his chin, and frightened dark eyes fixed on the dog in Daniel's arms. Hope flickered across his face, but fear swallowed it. Before Daniel could speak, the boy turned and ran, his small boots kicking snow into the air until the trees hid him. Across the road, beyond the river, a black pickup sat beneath the pines with its headlights off. For one long second, Daniel saw only the dark shape of a driver behind the windshield. Then the engine started. The truck rolled away without a word, leaving 2 black tracks through the snow. Daniel stood beneath the fading Michigan sky with the starving dog against his chest. Chief pressed close to his leg, the child's note in his hand, and the terrible certainty that one dog had been found, but another might still be waiting. Daniel did not remember driving fast, only driving carefully, because the dog in the back seat seemed breakable in a way that made every turn feel like a test of mercy. Chief sat beside her on the folded cargo blanket, not touching her, not crowding her, only keeping his broad, sable body close enough that warmth could cross the small space between them. The wounded female German shepherd lay with her head low and her pale eyes open, wrapped in Daniel's jacket liner, trembling whenever the truck passed beneath a streetlight or another vehicle's headlights flashed across the windows. Downtown Traverse City glowed wet and cold under the late winter night, the sidewalks edged with brown snow, the river bridges slick with ice. The shop windows already dark except for a few restaurants where people sat laughing in yellow light, unaware that a small, starving life was being carried through their city like a secret. Daniel pulled into the emergency veterinary clinic just before closing, a low brick building tucked beside a pharmacy and a row of bare maples. The receptionist, a round-faced young man with tired eyes and a gentle voice, looked up from the desk, and whatever ordinary greeting he had prepared died when he saw Daniel come through the door with the shivering dog in his arms and Chief moving silently at his heel. "We need a doctor," Daniel said, and his voice had the calm edge of a man who had already made room inside himself for bad news. Dr. Laura Mitchell came from the treatment hallway before the receptionist finished calling her. She was 54, tall and lean, with silver blonde hair twisted into a loose knot, sharp green eyes behind rectangular glasses, and the kind of narrow, steady hands that looked too delicate until they were holding something frightened and suddenly became anchors. Her skin was fair and lightly lined from years of Michigan winters and long outdoor rescue calls, and there was a slight stiffness in her left shoulder from an old car accident that had ended her career as a competitive rider but pushed her toward veterinary medicine with a fiercer tenderness. People in town sometimes said Dr. Mitchell was blunt, but Daniel saw at once that she was not cold. She simply refused to decorate suffering with pretty words. "Exam room 2, she said, already reaching for a warm towel. Daniel laid the shepherd down only when Laura told him the table had heat beneath the pad. The dog tried to fold into herself, paws tight, ears flat, body expecting restraint before anyone touched her. Chief stopped at the open doorway and lowered himself to the floor as if he understood some invisible border of trust. The shepherd's eyes found him, and the panic in her chest loosened by a breath. Laura noticed. She noticed everything. "Keep him where she can see him," she said. "He's doing more than we are right now." Daniel stood beside the table with one hand low near the dog's shoulder, not pressing, not claiming, only offering a steady presence she could refuse. Laura worked slowly. She checked the dog's gums and frowned at their paleness, lifted the eyelids, felt along the ribs, hips, spine, and abdomen, listened to her heart and lungs, parted mats in the gray fur to reveal scratches that had healed badly beneath dirt. The dog flinched at the scanner when the technician passed it over her shoulders. The scanner gave nothing back. No chip, no hidden number, no easy history waiting beneath the skin. Laura scanned again lower along the chest and neck, then shook her head. Nothing. The word landed heavily in Daniel's mind. No owner to call, no name to use, no proof that anyone had been looking for her. When Laura reached the neck, she went very still. Beneath the dirty fur ran a dark, uneven groove, deep in places, rubbed raw in others, with thickened skin where healing had tried to happen around repeated injury. Laura parted the hair with 2 fingers and did not speak for several seconds. Daniel watched her face, not the wound. He had learned long ago that professionals told the truth first with their eyes. "This wasn't a normal collar," she said finally. "It looks like prolonged pressure from rope or nylon. Too tight, repeatedly stressed. She's dehydrated, underweight, cold exposed, and she has old abrasions consistent with confinement or being dragged over rough ground." The dog closed her eyes when Laura said it, as though even words had weight. Daniel looked through the doorway at Chief, whose amber eyes never left the table. Something moved in Daniel then. Not rage in its loud form, but a quiet vow with no audience. Laura had the technician prepare fluids, parasite treatment, a small meal plan, antibiotics for irritated skin, and instructions strict enough to rebuild the dog without shocking a starved body. While they waited, Daniel unfolded the damp notebook scrap from the bridge and showed it to Laura. "Please don't leave them alone." Laura read it once, then again, and the hard line of her mouth softened in a way Daniel had not expected. "Them," she said. Daniel nodded. The shepherd stirred at the sound of paper moving, opened her eyes, and looked toward the door again. Not toward the exit, toward memory. "She kept looking back under the bridge," Daniel said, "like something was missing." Laura rested both hands on the edge of the table, careful not to touch the dog without permission. Then maybe something was. It was nearly midnight when Daniel signed the temporary care paperwork. The clinic had found no lost dog report matching her description in the local database, no shelter alert, no county registration. On the form, where a name was needed, Daniel paused. The dog's coat was gray beneath the mud, soft as fireplace ash where the fur had been cleaned. She looked like something almost extinguished, but not gone. "Willow," he said quietly, surprising himself. Laura glanced up. Daniel kept his eyes on the dog. Because she bent, but she didn't break. Chief lifted his head at the sound of the name, and Willow, as if she recognized not the word but the gentleness behind it, stopped trembling for a single second. By morning, Daniel had slept less than 2 hours. He left Willow resting safely at the clinic under Laura's watch and returned to the old bridge with Chief before the park filled with dog walkers and school traffic. The sky was pale and hard, the river black under plates of ice, and the place beneath the bridge looked smaller in daylight, which somehow made what had happened there feel worse. Daniel was crouched near the lowest step, studying the half-filled tracks Chief had found behind the bridge, when a woman's voice said, "Please, don't scare him if he comes back." Daniel turned slowly. Sarah Turner stood near the cottonwoods with her arms folded tight around herself. She was 36, medium height, slender from stress rather than vanity, with light skin reddened by cold, sandy blonde hair pulled into a messy ponytail, and blue-gray eyes that looked like they had forgotten how to rest. She wore a Navy dispatcher's jacket over jeans and snow boots, and her face held the careful composure of someone used to answering other people's emergencies while hiding her own. Her husband had died 3 years earlier in a highway accident during a lake-effect storm, and widowhood had left her practical, protective, and quick to blame herself for dangers she had not caused. Daniel rose without stepping closer. Chief remained at his side, calm and still. Sarah looked at the dog, then at the bridge, and shame crossed her face. "My son's name is Eli," she said. "He's 12, thin, red cap, runs when he's scared." Daniel thought of the boy behind the tree. He left the note. Sarah swallowed. And the food. For weeks. Her voice cracked, but she caught it before it broke. He kept saving pieces from dinner. Lunch meat, crackers, anything. I thought he was just not eating at school again. Then I found mud on his boots and dog hair on his gloves. Daniel waited. She seemed grateful that he did not fill the silence. "There were 2 dogs," she said. "Eli called the gray one Willow, before he knew anyone else would ever find her. The other one he called Finn. Black and tan, younger maybe, or just smaller, more frightened in an angry way. Eli said Finn always stood in front of Willow whenever someone came near, even though he was shaking too." Sarah pressed one hand over her mouth, then lowered it. "A few nights ago, Eli saw a man by the bridge. Black pickup, one cracked taillight. He had a blue rope. Eli said the man dragged Finn toward Pine Hollow Road while Willow got loose and hid under the bridge. After that, Eli was terrified the man would come back and take her too." Daniel looked toward the road where the pickup had vanished the night before. Chief's ears shifted forward, his nose angled toward the cold wind coming from the west. Sarah's eyes filled, but her voice stayed steady enough to prove how long she had been holding herself together for her son. Eli wanted to tell somebody. He did. But he thought if he said it out loud, the wrong person would hear. He thought Finn would be punished because he couldn't save him. Daniel folded the child's note and put it carefully into his pocket. Beneath the bridge, the snow had already begun to cover the old prints, but the story they left behind had sharpened instead of fading. Willow had escaped into the cold. Finn had not. And somewhere beyond Pine Hollow Road, a black and tan German shepherd with a blue rope around his neck might still be waiting for the boy who had named him. By the time Daniel brought Willow home, the afternoon had turned colorless, and the snow outside Traverse City looked less like winter's blessing than winter's unfinished business. His cabin stood beyond the last quiet houses, set back from a narrow road where pine trees leaned over the ditches and old fence posts wore caps of ice. It was a simple place built of dark timber, with a low porch, a stone chimney, a small tool shed, a fenced yard, and a line of black pines standing at the edge of the property like silent guards. Daniel had bought it after leaving the Navy because it was far enough from town that nobody asked questions if he went quiet for days, yet close enough that he could still pretend he belonged somewhere. Inside, the cabin smelled of cedar, coffee, dog blankets, gun oil locked away in an old cabinet, and the faint smoke of the fireplace. To most people, it would have felt warm. To Willow, warmth was only another thing she did not yet trust. Daniel carried her in wrapped in the clinic blanket Dr. Laura Mitchell had given him. Willow's gray coat had been cleaned in places, but mud still clung near her hips and tail, and the dark groove around her neck looked even worse under the lamplight, no longer hidden by bridge shadows. Her body stiffened the moment Daniel's boots crossed the threshold. Her pale yellow eyes moved from the door to the windows, then to Daniel's hands, then to Chief, as if she were counting all possible dangers before choosing which one might hurt first. Daniel lowered her gently onto a folded blanket near the far wall, not too close to the fire, not too far from Chief's bed, and then stepped away. That was harder than it should have been. A part of him wanted to fix everything with motion: food, water, towels, medicine, commands, order. But trauma did not obey a command structure. It came like winter fog, low and patient, filling every corner until even kindness looked suspicious. Daniel knew that from men who came home from war with clean clothes and ruined sleep. He knew it from himself. Chief entered after him and paused in the center of the room, a 7-year-old sable German shepherd with the grave patience of an old campaigner. His amber eyes studied Willow, not with pity, but with recognition. Then he walked to his water bowl, drank slowly, and stepped away. Willow watched the bowl as if it might vanish or bite. Daniel did not speak. Chief lowered himself by the hearth, turning his head just enough that Willow could see his face without feeling challenged. Minutes passed. The fire cracked, and Willow flattened herself against the blanket, but Chief did not move. Finally, she stretched her neck forward, took one quick touch of water, then jerked back, waiting for punishment that did not come. Daniel felt the ache of it behind his ribs. He had seen courage in explosions, in rescues, in men running toward gunfire, but sometimes courage was only a starving dog daring to drink in a room where nobody struck her. That first night was made of small negotiations. Daniel placed food in a shallow dish, only a little, exactly as Laura had instructed. Willow refused it until Chief ate from his own bowl. Even then, she approached like a thief, took 3 bites, and retreated. When Daniel closed the front door against the wind, she dropped flat to the floor. When a log popped in the fire, she scrambled behind an old armchair, her nails scraping wood. When Daniel reached toward a shelf and a coil of utility rope slipped down with a soft thud, Willow froze so completely that even Chief lifted his head. Her eyes went empty, not looking at the cabin anymore, but at some place inside memory where a blue rope tightened and snow smelled like fear. Daniel picked up the rope slowly, carried it outside without a word, and shut it in the shed. He did not apologize out loud. Apologies meant little to creatures who had heard human voices before pain. Instead, he returned, sat on the floor with his back against the kitchen cabinet, and kept his hands resting open on his knees. Chief looked from Daniel to Willow, then gave a long, tired sigh, the kind of sigh an old sergeant might give when surrounded by recruits who had not read the manual. Daniel almost smiled, and the smile surprised him. For 3 days, the cabin changed around Willow. Daniel stopped wearing boots inside because the sound made her tremble. He set firewood down gently instead of dropping it. He left doors open when he could, so she would not feel trapped by sudden hinges. Chief became her quiet map of safety. If Chief crossed the room, Willow eventually crossed halfway. If Chief slept near the hearth, Willow crept to the edge of the rug. If a truck passed outside and Willow's body folded toward panic, Chief rose and stood between her and the window, not barking, not showing teeth, simply becoming a wall she could hide behind without shame. On the 4th morning, Daniel found half a piece of softened kibble tucked inside one of his boots. On the 5th, he found a biscuit hidden beneath the corner of the rug. Willow watched him discover it with wide, guilty eyes. Daniel did not laugh loudly, because laughter might become thunder in her mind, but Chief sat beside the boot with such solemn judgment that Daniel whispered, "Logistics problem, Chief?" The old K-9 blinked once, as if confirming a serious supply chain violation. Daniel picked up the biscuit and placed it back near Willow's dish. "You don't have to store winter anymore," he said softly. "Not here." Willow did not come to him, but she did not run. That was enough. Late that afternoon, Chief rose from his place near the door before Daniel heard anything. He did not tense like he had for the bridge or the black pickup. He simply stood, ears forward, nose working the air beyond the porch. Daniel moved to the window and saw a small figure near the fence line where snow had drifted against the wire. Eli Turner stood there in his red knit cap and crooked blue coat, one mitten missing, sandy hair sticking out in damp pieces, his thin face pale with cold and worry. He was 12, but grief and fear had made him look older in the eyes and younger in the shoulders. He held a school notebook against his chest like evidence, confession, and prayer all at once. Daniel stepped onto the porch without Chief at first, keeping his hands visible. "Eli," he said gently. The boy flinched at his name, but did not run. Behind Daniel, inside the cabin, Willow had risen. She stood partly hidden behind Chief, who had moved to the doorway, her head low and ears uncertain. Eli saw her, and his mouth trembled. "She's alive," he whispered. Daniel nodded. The boy squeezed the notebook until the cover bent. "I tried to feed both of them," he said. I didn't know what else to do." Daniel came no closer than the porch steps. "Your mom told me." Eli's eyes dropped. "She's mad." "She's scared," Daniel said. "Those are different things." Snow slid from a pine branch somewhere behind the fence. Eli, startled, looked toward the road and shoved the notebook through the wire. Daniel walked down slowly and took it. Inside were pencil drawings pressed so hard the paper had almost torn. The black pickup with a cracked left taillight, a rear bumper dented near the corner, a partial license plate written 3 different ways, the path from the old bridge to a wooded road marked Pine Hollow, and a long, low building behind a crooked sign. On the last page the words shook across the paper. "Finn is still there." Daniel looked up. Eli's face had gone gray with the effort of telling the truth. "He stood in front of Willow," the boy said. "Every time. Even when he was scared. The man took him because Finn bit the rope. I think he punished him for it." Through the cabin window, Willow stared at Eli, and for one fragile second her tail moved, barely more than a memory. Chief remained between her and the world, steady as a vow. Daniel closed the notebook carefully. The sun had begun to sink behind the pines, laying long blue shadows across the snow. That night, Willow slept at the edge of the hearth rug, close enough that Chief's fur nearly touched hers. Daniel sat awake with Eli's notebook on the table, the drawings spread beneath the lamp, and the name, Pine Hollow Road, written in his mind like a door he had not yet opened. He looked at Willow, then at Chief, and understood with a cold certainty that if Finn was still alive, he was waiting in the darkness Willow had escaped. The storm came off Lake Michigan after sunset, dragging sleet and snow across the pines until Daniel's cabin seemed to shrink inside the dark. The windows rattled in their frames, and the old chimney breathed low orange light across the plank floor where Willow lay near the edge of the hearth rug. Not asleep, not fully awake, only resting in the cautious way of a creature still listening for the world to turn cruel again. Chief was stretched between her and the front door, his sable body half in shadow, his amber eyes closed just enough to fool someone who did not know him. Daniel sat at the kitchen table with Eli's notebook open under the lamp. The child's drawings had begun to feel less like drawings and more like coordinates on a battlefield. The cracked taillight, the dented bumper, the partial plate, the road marked Pine Hollow, the long, low kennel behind a crooked sign, and the sentence that would not leave Daniel's mind. Finn is still there. He had read those words so many times they no longer looked written by pencil. They looked carved. Outside, a gust slammed snow against the glass. Willow lifted her head. Chief opened his eyes. Daniel did not move at first because he trusted Chief's ears more than his own. The old K9 rose slowly, without a growl, without panic, and stood squarely facing the door. A moment later, pale headlights washed across the front window, sliding over the wall, over the table, over the notebook, then disappearing as an engine cut off in the drive. Willow's body collapsed backward as if the sound had hands. Her paws scrambled against the rug. Her ears flattened so tightly they nearly vanished into her gray fur. Daniel stood, closed the notebook, and moved to the side of the window instead of in front of it. Through the snow-blurred glass, he saw the black pickup idling near the fence line. One rear light cracked, its right bumper dented near the corner exactly as Eli had drawn it. A man stepped out and shut the door with deliberate force. He was in his late 40s, heavy through the chest and stomach, with a thick neck, pale, winter-reddened skin, close-set gray eyes, and a dark beard trimmed short around a mouth that seemed built more for contempt than speech. He wore a brown canvas work coat, faded jeans, and mud-stiff boots. His shoulders had the broadness of a man once strong and still used to other people remembering it. Dale Mercer had the look of someone who had spent years handling animals and weaker men by standing too close, speaking too low, and letting silence do the choking for him. What had made him that way was not pain, Daniel thought, but permission. Too many years of people stepping aside because cruelty was easier to avoid than confront. 3 knocks struck the door, not hurried, not polite, heavy enough to make Willow whimper behind Chief. Daniel rested one hand lightly near Chief's collar, not restraining him, only letting the dog know they were still working under control. Then he opened the door halfway, keeping his body angled inside the frame. Snow curled past his boots. Dale's eyes did not stop on Daniel's face. They went over his shoulder, straight into the cabin, searching. "You got something that belongs to me," Dale said. His voice was rough, nicotine dark, with the lazy confidence of a man who expected fear to save him effort. Daniel did not answer at once. He let the cold gather between them. "What are you claiming?" Dale's eyes narrowed. "The gray female. That one." He lifted his chin toward the room. "She's mine." Behind Daniel, Willow began to shake so hard the tags on Chief's old blanket clicked softly against the floor. Dale heard it and smiled without warmth. Daniel felt his own breathing slow, the way it used to before a door was breached, before the world became loud. "What's her name?" he asked. Dale's mouth tightened. "Doesn't matter. It matters if she's yours. She never earned one worth keeping." The sentence entered the cabin like dirty water. Daniel felt Willow press herself lower behind Chief. The K9 stepped forward one pace, placing his body cleanly between her and the opening. Still silent, still controlled. Dale looked at him, and for the first time some small measure of caution crossed his face. Chief was old, but not weak. Calm, but not soft. Daniel kept his voice level. "If you're claiming ownership, I'll need proof. Vaccination records, county license, microchip registration, adoption or purchase paperwork, veterinary history, photographs showing lawful possession, and an explanation for why she was found dehydrated, underweight, hypothermic, and hiding beneath a public bridge with a rope scar around her neck." Dale's eyes moved back to Daniel then. He seemed to see the man clearly for the first time. The still posture, the square jaw under the close beard, the cold blue eyes, the hands that did not fidget, the kind of quiet that did not come from uncertainty. "You some kind of cop?" "I'm the man standing between you and that dog." Dale gave a short laugh, but there was no humor in it. "You don't know what you're getting in the middle of." Daniel's fingers did not move from Chief's collar. "Then explain it." Dale leaned closer to the opening. Snow gathered on his cap and shoulders, his breath smelled faintly of cigarettes and stale coffee. "Dogs like that don't get better because somebody puts a blanket on them. They're either useful or they're not. That gray one was trouble. Too soft, too jumpy, always hiding behind the other one." At those words, Willow made a sound Daniel had not heard from her before, a thin, broken whine pulled out of some buried room inside her. The other one. Finn. Dale's gaze flicked toward the sound and irritation sharpened his face. Not grief, not worry. Possession. Daniel understood then that the man had not come because he missed Willow. He had come because something he discarded had survived long enough to become evidence. "Leave the property," Daniel said. Dale's smile faded. "Careful, Hayes." Hearing his name in Dale's mouth changed the air. He had asked around. He had watched. He had come prepared to press old wounds if he could find them. Daniel did not step back. "You have no paperwork, no lawful claim, and no reason to be here in a storm. Leave." For a few seconds only the wind spoke. Chief stood like a carved thing, his amber eyes fixed on Dale's hands. Willow trembled behind him, but she no longer tried to run. Dale finally backed down the porch steps, slow enough to make retreat look like choice. At the truck, he turned once. "Some roads are better left alone," he said. Then he climbed in, started the engine, and pulled away, the cracked taillight bleeding red through the snow until the pines swallowed it. Daniel closed the door and locked it. Willow remained crouched behind Chief, her eyes huge, her breath shallow. Daniel did not reach for her. He only knelt several feet away and let his hand rest open on the floor. Chief lowered himself beside her, and after a long moment, Willow pressed her muzzle against his shoulder as if checking whether the wall between her and Dale was still real. Daniel's phone vibrated on the kitchen table. Sarah Turner's name flashed on the screen. When he answered, Eli's voice came through before Sarah's, thin and shaking. Mr. Hayes? I'm here, Eli. The boy was breathing too fast. Somewhere behind him, Sarah was saying his name, trying to calm him. It was him, Eli whispered. The man at your house. I saw his truck from my window. He's the one who took Finn. Daniel's eyes went to the notebook. Tell me slowly. Eli swallowed hard. He had the blue rope. Finn bit it. Finn tried to stand in front of Willow, and the man got mad. He dragged him toward Pine Hollow Road. I followed once, not all the way, but close enough. There's a building with metal doors. I heard dogs inside. More than Finn. They were barking, but not loud, like the doors were closed. The boy began to cry, trying not to make noise. I should have told sooner. Daniel looked at Willow curled against Chief, at the rope scar around her neck, at the storm erasing Dale's tire tracks outside. You're telling now, he said. That matters. Stay inside. Lock the doors. Give the phone to your mother. When Sarah came on, Daniel heard the fear she was forcing into discipline. He told her to keep Eli home, write down everything he remembered, and not let him near Pine Hollow. After the call ended, Daniel stood in the cabin's dim light with Chief watching him and Willow shaking at his feet. The storm pressed against the walls. Dale Mercer had come for a dog and left behind a confession without meaning to. Finn was not a rumor anymore. Pine Hollow was not just a road in a child's notebook. And somewhere behind metal doors in the snow, more dogs were waiting. By noon the next day, the storm had weakened into a gray, bitter snowfall that seemed less like weather and more like something trying to cover its own tracks. Daniel drove toward Pine Hollow Road with Chief in the passenger seat and Willow secured in the back beneath a clean blanket, her thin body still healing, her yellow eyes fixed on the world beyond the glass as if every passing pine might remember her. He had not wanted to bring her back toward the place that had broken her, but when he stepped toward the truck without her, Willow had risen from the hearthrug and followed him to the door with a trembling determination that made refusal feel crueler than risk. Chief had stood beside her, grave and silent, as though the old K-9 understood that some doors could not be opened without the witness who had once escaped them. At the turnoff, Deputy Mark Sullivan waited beside a dark sheriff's SUV, a broad, square-built man in his early 40s with close-cropped black hair, tired brown eyes, and a jaw that looked permanently braced against bad news. Mark had worked rural law enforcement long enough to know that cruelty rarely announced itself honestly. It hid behind property lines, old sheds, and men who called living things livestock when they meant property. Beside him stood Jenna Brooks, the county animal control officer, a compact woman of 38 with copper-red hair tucked beneath a wool cap, freckled pale skin burned raw by winter wind, and calm hazel eyes that softened only when animals were looking. She wore a heavy green field coat, mud-stained boots, and thick gloves, and carried herself with the careful gentleness of someone who had walked into too many barns, kennels, and backyards where fear had teeth. "We go slow," Jenna said, after Daniel told them again what Eli had heard. "Dogs kept scared too long don't always know rescue from capture." Daniel nodded. Chief stepped down from the truck and lowered his nose to the snow. The old kennel property lay behind a sagging wire fence, almost invisible from the road except for a crooked wooden sign half buried in ice. The letters on it had faded until Pine Hollow Kennels looked like a ghost of a business rather than a place where anything still lived. Snow had softened the driveway, but beneath it Daniel saw older tire ruts, wide and deep, pressed into frozen mud before the last storm. The fence leaned inward in several places. A rusted water trough sat overturned near the gate. The main building was long and low, with peeling white siding, a roof patched in black tar and narrow metal doors along one side like sealed mouths. Chief moved ahead with no drama, tail level, ears forward, reading the ground more honestly than any witness. He stopped first near the gate post, sniffed a loop of old blue fiber frozen into the wire, then continued toward the warehouse at the rear of the property. Willow, still in the truck, began to shake when the building came into view. Her body pressed low against the blanket, but she did not turn away. Daniel saw that and felt the weight of what courage could look like when it had no strength left to spare. Mark cut the chain on the main door with bolt cutters, the sharp snap cracking through the cold. For a second, nothing happened. Then the door scraped open, and the smell rolled out. It was heavy, wet, sour, and alive with old misery. Dirty straw, stale urine, mold, cheap disinfectant poured over filth, rancid feed, rusted metal, and the close, frightened odor of dogs held too long in too little space. Jenna's face tightened, but she did not step back. "There are animals inside," she said quietly. Chief already knew. His body had changed, not into attack, but into work. Daniel unclipped the flashlight from his jacket and entered with Mark on one side and Jenna on the other. Light moved across rows of wire cages, broken bowls, torn blankets, chew marks along metal bars, and papers scattered over a workbench as if someone had left in anger or haste. The first dog they saw was an older German shepherd with a cloudy left eye and a coat so dull it looked dusted with ash. He lay flat until Chief's scent reached him, then lifted his head with painful effort. Farther down, a young Belgian Malinois paced in a circle so tight it had worn a dark ring in the dirty straw. Two mixed shepherds pressed themselves against the backs of separate crates, eyes wide, ribs showing beneath patchy fur. Jenna moved slowly, speaking in a low, steady voice that had no sudden edges. "Easy, babies. Nobody's rushing you." Then a sound came from the farthest corner. Not a bark, not exactly a growl, but a raw, furious warning from a throat that had used anger because fear had failed. Daniel turned his flashlight. In the darkest cage behind a warped metal door, Finn was alive. He was a young, black and tan German shepherd, smaller than Willow but built with sharp, wiry strength beneath starvation. His coat tangled with straw and dried mud, one front leg held slightly off the ground, his amber-brown eyes burning with a mixture of terror and defiance. His ears were too large for his thin face, giving him the look of a half-grown dog forced too early into an old soldier's war. A frayed blue nylon rope still hung from a loop near the cage wall. When Jenna took one step closer, Finn exploded forward, slamming his paws against the bars, teeth flashing, a snarl tearing out of him so violently that one of the other dogs whimpered. Jenna stopped at once and lowered her gaze. "Not mean," she murmured, "scared." Chief stood beside Daniel, perfectly still. Finn snarled at him too, but there was a break in it, a stutter of confusion. Chief did not answer the challenge. He simply lowered himself to the filthy floor, old bones and all, and rested his head on his paws as if the entire crisis were an unruly young recruit who had misplaced his manners. Even Mark glanced at Daniel then, and in another life it might have been funny. Here, the tenderness of it hurt. Daniel went back to the truck and opened the rear door. Willow trembled when the kennel smell reached her, but when Finn barked again, her head lifted. It was the first sound from him she had heard in weeks. Daniel did not pull her. He let her choose. Slowly, painfully, Willow stepped down into the snow and followed him inside, Chief rising to walk between her and every shadow except the one she needed to face. At the corner cage, Finn saw her. His body froze mid-growl. His ears shifted forward. The anger drained from his eyes so suddenly that what remained looked younger than fear. Willow took one small step, then another, until her nose touched the wire. Finn pressed his muzzle through the bars, and the two dogs breathed each other in with desperate silence. No joyful barking, no leaping, no easy miracle, just recognition. Willow closed her eyes. Finn stopped shaking for the first time. While Jenna knelt nearby and prepared a slip lead without forcing it, Mark searched the small office behind the kennel row. He called Daniel over a few minutes later. The room held an old desk, a dented filing cabinet, cracked coffee mugs, empty cigarette packs, and a ledger swollen from damp. Inside were names with no full addresses, cash amounts, notes about private security prospects, and cruel marks written beside dog descriptions. Too soft, won't bite, noise sensitive, no value, return if aggressive enough. Mark found several strips of blue nylon rope in a drawer, one still stained with gray fur caught in the fibers, along with rough contracts signed by Dale Mercer and partial details matching recent missing dog reports from farms and roadside stops across Grand Traverse County. Daniel looked back through the dirty office window at Willow and Finn touching noses through the cage while Chief stood guard over them both. Pine Hollow was no longer a rumor in a child's notebook. It was real, it stank of neglect, and it held enough proof to turn fear into a case. The wind changed before anyone noticed the boy was gone, turning colder and sharper as it came down through the black pines behind Pine Hollow Kennels. Inside the long warehouse, the rescue had become a careful storm of its own. Jenna Brooks moving from cage to cage with quiet commands. Mark Sullivan photographing the ropes and ledgers in the back office. Daniel Hayes standing near Finn's open cage with Chief at his side and Willow trembling only a few feet away from the dog she had once left behind because survival had dragged them in different directions. Finn had finally been eased out of the cage, though not without warning growls, shaking legs, and one frightened snap at empty air when a loop of leash brushed too close to his scarred neck. He was smaller than Chief, younger than Willow had made him seem in memory, with a black and tan coat matted into hard ridges, one front paw held slightly above the filthy floor, and eyes too fierce for a body so thin. Yet the instant Willow stood close to him, Finn stopped fighting the room. He leaned against her with all the stubborn pride of a little soldier who refused to admit he had been waiting to fall apart. Chief watched them both with grave patience, occasionally giving Finn a look so solemn and offended by the younger dog's bad manners that Daniel would have smiled if the air had not still smelled of cages, fear, and old cruelty. Outside, engines rumbled as animal control vans backed toward the warehouse. Rescued dogs whimpered under blankets. Snow thickened over the tire tracks. Somewhere near the front gate, Sarah Turner had arrived in her old blue SUV after hearing from Mark that Pine Hollow was real. She had not been allowed inside the warehouse, but she stood near the road with both hands wrapped around herself, her sandy blonde ponytail whipping loose in the wind, her face pale with the particular fear of a mother whose child had once carried secrets too heavy for his age. Eli had begged to come, and she had refused, or thought she had. He had been quiet in the back seat when she drove near the property, quiet in the way children become when they are making promises no adult can hear. While Sarah spoke to one of the deputies near the gate, Eli slipped out, clutching his red gloves and moving between two snow-buried pines. Not because he wanted adventure, not because he wanted to disobey, but because Finn was inside that place, and the thought of another door closing before he saw him alive had become unbearable. Eli Turner was 12, thin as a winter branch, with sandy hair under his red knit cap, dark blue eyes too watchful for childhood, and a heart that had learned guilt before it had learned how little power a child truly has. He heard barking behind the warehouse and followed it, then saw the flashing lights, the uniforms, the stretchers, the cages being carried out. Shame hit him first. If he had spoken sooner, maybe Finn would not have stayed there so long. If he had been braver, maybe Willow would never have trembled under the bridge. When a deputy turned near the driveway, Eli panicked and ducked into the woods, intending only to circle back to his mother before anyone noticed. But the storm swallowed distance. The fence line curved away. Pine branches bent low with snow, hiding the road. The ground dipped beneath a crust of white, and Eli's boot slid on buried ice. He went down hard, tumbling through brittle brush until his coat snagged on a thorny branch and one leg wedged beneath a mat of dead limbs at the edge of a shallow creek cut. The creek was mostly frozen, a narrow black seam of water showing between plates of ice, and the cold rose from it like breath from an open grave. Eli tried to pull free, but pain shot through his ankle. He called once, but the wind broke his voice apart and carried it nowhere. Back at the kennel, Sarah noticed the empty back seat first. Her whole body changed. She tore open the SUV door, shouted Eli's name, then turned toward Daniel with a face stripped of every practiced calm she had ever used as an emergency dispatcher. "He was here," she said, voice cracking. "Daniel, he was right here." In the same moment, Willow jerked toward the rear path behind the warehouse. She had been standing near Finn, exhausted and trembling, but now her ears lifted, her nose working the air with sudden urgency. She pulled once, then again, not toward the road, not toward the truck, but toward the woods. Finn, who had barely been able to stand, forced weight onto his injured paw and gave a sharp bark that startled even Jenna. It was not the defensive snarl from the cage. It was alarm, raw and certain. Chief rose before Daniel spoke, his old body becoming all-purpose. "Search," Daniel said, low and clear. Chief took the path first, nose sweeping the snow with professional precision, reading the half-filled footprints, the broken crust, the bent grass beneath fresh powder. Willow followed beside Daniel, fragile but driven by something deeper than training. She knew Eli's scent: school paper, wool mittens, lunch crumbs, the small hands that had pushed food beneath a bridge when everyone else had passed by. Finn limped behind them, refusing Jenna's attempt to hold him back until Daniel gave a tight nod. The little black and tan shepherd would not be useful for speed, but he seemed bound to the boy by a loyalty forged in hunger and secrecy. The search became a procession through white confusion. Chief steady as a compass, Willow trembling but pulling when the wind shifted, Finn stumbling, stopping, listening, then barking once toward a narrow cut between the pines. Mark moved behind Daniel with a rescue rope over one shoulder, his broad face dark with worry. Sarah tried to follow, but Jenna caught her gently by the arm and kept her from the slope. "Let them find him," Jenna said, her own voice soft but firm. "They've got the scent." Then Finn saw the glove. It hung from a thorn branch, bright red against the snow like a small flag of distress. He lunged toward it and barked again and again, the sound high and desperate, cutting through the storm. Willow pushed forward, paws slipping, and Chief moved past the branch to the creek edge where he stopped so suddenly Daniel nearly ran into him. Below, half hidden by brush and shadow, Eli lay wedged against the bank, his face white with cold, one arm wrapped around a root, his red cap gone, his lips moving without sound. Daniel was down the slope before fear could become thought. Mark anchored the rope from above while Daniel slid the last few feet on one knee, snow packing into his jeans, ice biting through his gloves. "Eli," he said, forcing his voice steady. "Look at me." And the boy's eyes opened wider, wet and terrified. "Finn," he whispered. "He found your glove," Daniel said, "and Willow found you." That did what warmth could not. Eli began to cry. Together, Daniel and Mark freed his trapped leg and pulled him up the slope, inch by careful inch, until Jenna wrapped him in an emergency blanket and Sarah fell to her knees beside him, shaking so hard she could barely hold him. Eli reached past the blanket. Willow came first, lowering her head to his chest with a softness that seemed impossible after all she had endured. Eli wrapped both arms around her neck without touching the scar, sobbing into her gray fur. Finn limped close, still trembling from cold and fear, and Eli touched the top of his head with 2 fingers, as if afraid he might disappear if held too tightly. Finn did not growl. He leaned into the boy's hand, then shifted his thin body against the wind as though even half-starved, even injured, he still meant to stand guard. Chief sat behind them in the falling snow, alert and silent, watching the trees, the road, the old kennel, and the lives gathered at his feet. Daniel stood above the creek with snow melting on his face, looking at the boy who had once fed 2 forgotten dogs and the 2 dogs who had now brought him back. For a long moment, no one moved except the storm around them. Then Sarah whispered Eli's name like a prayer finally answered, and Willow pressed closer to the boy, while Finn stayed beside them, shaking, brave, and alive. Dale Mercer was arrested before the last of the storm had finished melting from Pine Hollow Road. Not in some dramatic blaze of sirens and shouting, but in the flat, gray morning that comes after wicked weather, when the world looks tired of secrets. Mark Sullivan and the county investigators built the case piece by piece until even Dale's old habit of intimidation could not push the truth back into the dark. Eli Turner's statement, Dr. Laura Mitchell's medical records on Willow, Finn's injured leg and rope-burned neck, the blue nylon cords found inside the kennel office, the damp ledger marked with cruel notes, the contracts for guard prospects, the missing dog reports from farms and roadside stops across Grand Traverse County, and the living dogs carried out of Pine Hollow wrapped in blankets instead of fear. Dale stood on the cracked concrete outside the sheriff's station with his heavy brown coat hanging open and his gray eyes still full of contempt. But for the first time, contempt did not move anyone. He looked smaller without the darkness of his kennel around him. He looked like what he was, a man who had mistaken silence for permission. The rescued dogs were taken into the county rehabilitation program, where Jenna Brooks and a small network of foster families began the long work of teaching them that hands could bring food, doors could open kindly, and names did not have to be commands. The older shepherd with the cloudy eye was named Walter by a retired schoolteacher who said he looked like an old soul who had read every sad book in the library. The young Malinois who had paced circles in the straw was given a quiet room, soft music, and a patient handler who never stepped directly toward her. The mixed shepherds were separated at first, then slowly brought together when Jenna discovered they slept better if they could hear each other breathing. None of it was quick. Healing rarely entered a room like a marching band. It came like thaw water under snow, invisible at first, then suddenly everywhere. Willow and Finn came home with Daniel. At first, Willow still lowered her head whenever the front door opened. She still watched boots, still stiffened when metal clinked, still slept lightly as if dreams themselves might betray her. But day by day, the gray returned to softness instead of dirt. Her ribs vanished beneath healthy weight. The scar around her neck faded from angry purple to pale memory. One morning, when Daniel entered the cabin carrying firewood, Willow did not retreat. She only lifted her head, blinked slowly, and rested it again beside Chief's paw. Daniel stood there longer than necessary with an armful of logs, his throat tight with the strange holiness of ordinary things. Finn healed differently. He was smaller than Chief, wirier than Willow, and even after weeks of food and care his black and tan coat still made him look like a stray spark rescued from a burned field. His injured paw mended, but his suspicion had stronger bones. He inspected every visitor with narrowed amber-brown eyes. He buried treats under the rug, behind Daniel's boots, once inside the laundry basket, and once with great seriousness in the empty kindling box, where Chief discovered it and sat beside the box like a judge awaiting confession. Daniel found himself laughing more than he expected that spring, but softly, because the humor always carried a bruise beneath it. Finn was not greedy. He was remembering hunger. Chief became the center of the cabin without asking for the role. The old K9 moved slower now, especially on cold mornings, and his muzzle had taken on more silver along the edges, but he still slept between the door and the two younger dogs. If Willow startled, Chief lifted his head. If Finn growled at a harmless sound, Chief gave him one long, weary look, and Finn usually reconsidered his entire military strategy. Daniel sometimes watched them in the firelight and felt something inside himself loosen, something that had been braced for years. He had once believed rescue meant entering danger, carrying someone out, and closing the door behind him. Willow and Finn taught him that rescue was the door staying open afterward. Sarah Turner changed too, though more quietly. She still worked long dispatch shifts, still wore exhaustion around her eyes, still checked the locks twice at night, but fear no longer sat on her shoulders like a second coat. Eli began sleeping with the light off again. He was still thin, still serious, still older in the eyes than any 12-year-old should have been, but when he visited Daniel's cabin after school, he no longer stood at the fence like a fugitive. He came through the gate. He sat on the porch steps with Willow's head on his knee, and Finn pressed against his boot, pretending not to need affection while leaning so hard into the boy that Eli sometimes had to brace himself. Sarah would watch from the porch rail, her sandy blonde hair loose in the spring wind, and Daniel could see gratitude in her face, but also grief for the weeks her son had carried alone. Daniel never told her guilt was useless. Parents did not surrender guilt because someone gave them permission. He only handed her coffee and let the dogs do what words could not. When April finally softened the land, Daniel chose a clear morning to return to the old bridge by the Boardman River. The snow had retreated into dirty patches under the trees. The river moved bright and restless beneath the wooden span. Buds had begun to show on the cottonwoods, small green promises no larger than a child's thumbnail. Daniel walked with Chief on his left, Willow near Eli, and Finn circling close enough to pretend he was guarding everyone from squirrels, wind, and possibly suspicious leaves. Sarah followed a few steps behind, quiet but not afraid. At the bridge, Eli stopped. For a moment his face became the face of the boy Daniel had first seen behind the tree, pale, frightened, carrying a secret too heavy for his small shoulders. Then he reached into his backpack and took out the blue toy truck with the missing wheel. He had cleaned it. The plastic still held scratches from snow and dirt, but the color had returned. Eli knelt beneath the lower step and placed it where Daniel had found the note months earlier. Not beside scraps of food this time. Not beside a plea. As a marker. As proof that the frightened boy who had once written, "Please don't leave them alone," had been heard. Willow approached slowly. Daniel watched her body, ready to step in if memory struck too hard, but Willow only lowered her nose to the old wood, breathed in the past and let it pass through her without taking her back. Then she turned and leaned against Eli's leg. Finn came beside her, ears forward, no growl in his throat, only a deep, uncertain quiet. Chief stood a few feet away in the sunlight, old and noble, his sable coat moving in the river wind like a banner after battle. Daniel looked at them all. Willow alive, Finn free, Eli standing in daylight, Sarah no longer alone with fear, Chief still watching over what he had chosen, and understood that the afternoon his old K9 stopped in the snow had not interrupted his life. It had returned him to it. That evening, back at the cabin, spring light poured gold across the porch. Willow slept with her head near Chief's shoulder. Finn tucked one stolen biscuit beneath Daniel's boot, badly hidden and clearly visible, then lay down with the proud exhaustion of a thief who believed his operation had succeeded. Daniel picked up the biscuit, set it beside Finn's bowl, and sat on the step while the river wind moved through the pines. No one under that roof was untouched by winter, not the man, not the boy, not the mother, not the dogs. But winter had not kept the final word. In the soft Michigan dusk, with 3 German shepherds breathing peacefully at his feet, Daniel finally believed that hope did not always arrive as thunder. Sometimes it came as a dog refusing to take another step, a child's trembling note, and 2 broken lives learning they had been worth saving all along. When this story ends, we are reminded that miracles do not always arrive with thunder in the sky or a voice loud enough to shake the earth. Sometimes a miracle comes quietly, through an old K9 refusing to take one more step, through a frightened child leaving food beneath a bridge, through a wounded dog finding the strength to love again, and through one man choosing not to walk away. In our daily lives, we may pass by people who are hiding their pain as silently as Willow hid beneath that bridge, or we may be carrying our own winter inside, wondering if anyone will notice. But God can use even the smallest act of kindness to open a door, save a life, and bring hope back where fear once lived. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs a little hope today. Leave a comment about the moment that moved you most, and subscribe for more stories of faith, healing, and the animals who lead us back to love. May God bless you, protect your family, and fill your days with mercy, courage, and second chances.